Welcome to another AI Office Hours. Today with me is Rune, co-founder of Maker, now Sky. I'm sure very well known in Web3, but do you want to quickly introduce yourself for the AI audience as well as folks who may be coming from other ecosystems? And we can dive in how you guys thinking about AI and what you're building.
Sure. Glad to be here, and I'll make a quick intro. So yeah, I'm Rune, co-founder of Sky, which used to be known as Maker for the last almost 10 years. It is like probably the oldest surviving DeFi project, and it's like the most profitable DeFi protocol, and one of the absolute largest, also one of the largest decentralized stablecoins in the world. And stablecoin is sort of that's kind of the bread and butter of what Maker built all those years ago and basically evolved into Sky over the last 10 years. And I'll quickly talk about why this changed to Sky and what that means. But just very specifically, basically, after Maker grew its DAI stablecoin to about $5 billion of DAI in circulation, then for several years, this upgrade was prepared, and through a governance vote, Maker then became Sky, which means that the MKR token basically became the Sky token, rather, is upgradable to the Sky token. And then there's also a new stablecoin called USDS, which DAI holders, which is the original stablecoin, they can upgrade to this USDS token and then basically get some new features. The most important being the ability to get token rewards built into the USDS token. And so USDS is just designed to be the best and easiest place to get decentralized savings. Right now, it gives users 12.5% of like a pretty steady return. And there's about $1 billion of the USDS supply that's earning this return currently. And so the reason why it's possible for Sky to offer such a high return to USDS holders is because the protocol, it's this very large DeFi protocol that basically is able to allocate the underlying asset that backs the value of USDS into all sorts of different yield opportunities. So that includes depositing into Aave and into Spark, which is a SubDAO of Sky, and we can get back to that in a second. But also into things like real assets like treasuries and USDC, and so basically getting the best of DeFi and TradFi. And yeah, I think the current circulating supply of USDS is something like 5.8 billion, and the TVL is like 11 billion of the whole system. But basically, the reason why this change to Sky happened, and it's sort of the same, it's basically the fundamental challenge that Maker very quickly bumped into as it started scaling, was basically that because what users want is they want a stable coin and they want a really good savings rate, right? And it's very attractive to be able to offer this 12.5% savings rate. But if you want to be able to get such a high return by allocating into the best of DeFi and TradFi, that means you have to be really smart at how you allocate those assets, and basically, there's a lot of complexity involved in that, right? There's a lot of you have to diversify into multiple different opportunities and sort of do what's called asset liability management, like sort of juggling, putting stuff into long-term assets and into short-term assets, so people can also easily make sure they can turn the USDS back into US dollars. And so, yeah, so like I said, basically this complexity became apparent quite early on, but it was very difficult to deal with it in Maker, basically, and it resulted in lots of politics and drama, basically, and a bunch of a lot of challenges of just figuring out how the hell do you run a large DeFi DAO. And basically, over time, it became clear that the solution is actually, or rather, a major part of the solution is AI, or really just more like the direction and the trend of basically structuring data and then using algorithms and using code and using math basically to handle that data, rather than have a bunch of politicians and a bunch of humans running this thing with vibes, right?
Yeah, so maybe to add context, yeah, from external observer, right? Like you effectively were one of the first ones to fully decentralize your team and organization and everything, right? And I think it was like 2019 or 20 when the organization was already sunset, and like it was a lot of different teams effectively working together kind of to maintain Maker. But indeed, it ended up being like a lot of kind of fighting on forums and on votes, etc., right, between token holders and people who are actually working, right, kind of exposing all of the same problems between, yeah, like people who are actually trying to do things and people who are kind of just investors and kind of expect things to be done but want it to be done, cheaply, but then representing and like, like without actually putting any sweat, right, representing equity. So it was a very interesting indeed experiment, but as you said, it kind of all of the other DAOs then through like 21, 22 kind of played out the same scenario where effectively you either had like a multi-sig of like 3-4 people who were executing, or it ended up being like a massive infighting of DAOs, right, without like things actually happening. And so kind of your point of like, hey, we kind of need AI to be the like central coordination here that actually, helps making decisions. Like this is something that I very much appreciate as well, because it does like this management of organization that doesn't have any hierarchy and doesn't have any power structure, right? And like clearly is not possible by traditional organization management, right? And so that's where I think indeed AI is coming very strong. So you've been working on this for past like couple years now, right? On how to
that's right.
AI into this.
And I mean, and you're basically right. I mean, and I guess a simple way to illustrate the basic challenge, right, is as you mentioned, the original Maker Foundation shut down, in 2020, I believe. It's actually a long time. I mean, there was already many, like at that time, Maker was already old, but nowadays that's actually ages ago, once again, right? But so the foundation was a pretty effective organization, right? But it was also centralized, and it was just like a hierarchy, basically, right? Like a classical structure. Then it got replaced by this thing called the core units. And so the core units were something like, completely independent, sort of like bureaucratic departments or something like that. They were chosen through like a vote, right? So like a political process chose these different core units and gave them each a budget, and then they were sort of expected to just like do good work with the budget they had, right? But yeah, you immediately get, there's this thing called the iron law of bureaucracy, right? Which is like you immediately get this thing that mostly, like, if the thing that gives you your money is doing politics, then you're going to spend the money sort of on doing politics, right? And this is how all large systems have this issue where you're missing kind of the feedback loop of like accountability and like getting the results and so on, right? So you want, if you're putting money into something, you want to make sure that like you're achieving you want to understand what the hell is this money even supposed to be used for, and how do we know if we're getting the results or not, and not just like vibes of like, well, we should have some marketing, so let's put some money into marketing, and we should have some engineering and so like, and actually it kind of works pretty well early on because you have a lot of really skilled, honest, really good people in these ecosystem always, right? Because the pioneers are always like really just like altruistic basically, and like entirely driven by the vision.
Well, the mission aligned, right? And vision aligned.
Yeah, exactly, right. So that's also why you get sort of fooled into thinking this works, but it only works at a small scale because like there's only that many of that types of people, and they only really are there when it's like really early. And then if you open up for like politicians, right, that are good at navigating billion-dollar bureaucracies, they're going to be pushing out those visionaries because like they don't want to be working in that kind of toxic environment, right? So that's kind of what started happening with Maker, and there was basically this complete disconnect. There was like a budget of something like 50 million being spent per year. Like I remember sort of looking at it and just being like, how that was totally disconnected from like the money the protocol was making, and it was kind of hidden because Maker had such a massive first mover advantage that it's just generating huge amounts of profits. And this continues to now it's like Sky is now making something like even though it's paying 12.5% in return to USDS holders, the protocol is also earning more than 150 million in profits or something. So it was kind of hidden at first that you had all that inefficiency in the bureaucracy. But then the bear market after like the last bubble, right, like 4 years ago came, and all the revenue disappeared, and suddenly it was just this like massive loss of just like bureaucrats basically sort of like holding on to like their budget streams and so on, right? And that's at this time I had sort of pulled back and wasn't really involved in the project. But then I basically realized I had to go back and like, okay, we need some kind of solution that just like really deals with this fundamentally, right? Figure out what the hell happened and like how do we avoid that this doesn't happen again. So at the time that was called Endgame, and it was basically, I mean, the idea was you want to make a single political action or like a single governance proposal that then removes the need for any future governance proposals. And that's kind of, I mean, already there, that's kind of something like, you know, and like a sort of auto-adaptive AI or something like that we're talking about here, right? It's like an algorithm that naturally sort of can handle any variables thrown at it, right? That's where you need to get to if you want, you know, as like one proposal to end all future proposals, right? So we kind of slowly started moving in that direction, right? And I think the other thing to think about the basic problem is this question of hierarchy versus flat organization, right? So what's the role of a hierarchy in a normal org? It's kind of like being the connective tissue of the brain in some sense, right? That you have like the individual specialists, they're all sort of sitting in the organization at the, like in the trenches doing actual work. And then you have the management layers that like, they sort of like they sort of build it up as kind of a pyramid, right? But the reason why the managers are needed is because if, like, first of all, the individual people sitting and doing the work, they don't know if there's somebody else somewhere doing the same work, right? That they could just use each other's work, so they don't do it in parallel. And also, if somebody leaves and somebody new joins in, you want to be able to like retain as much knowledge as possible and have some way to like train up the new person, right? And if it's totally flat and you don't have the kind of the hierarchy on top of the workers, then you lose both of these things. Like they don't know what's happening elsewhere in the organization, and you don't really have a way to like train new people coming in. They have to kind of learn it from scratch again. Okay, so the basic idea in Sky is basically that then instead of just rebuilding a hierarchy and having like some like decentralized hierarchy or something, it really just gets replaced with, I mean, I guess overly simplified because they replace it with AI. But more specifically, it's like it's really just trying to really have very, very good structured data that describes these things, right? So everyone should always have access to like the full breadth of the knowledge of like what are other people working on. And also, if I'm joining and I'm doing some work, here's like all the current knowledge. Here's all the like best practice. This is sort of everything that's been learned so far. And then whenever somebody does some work, like it's really important that they not just like learn what others have been doing, but that they their own data also gets sort of input into the system, right? So others can learn from that, or if they leave, somebody else can replace them, right? And this kind of data structuring and sharing layer is something we call the Atlas. And so the Atlas is kind of the brain of Sky, you could say, and it's also kind of like the legal system of Sky. But then from this, I mean, I've basically come to the point where I think of like legal systems nowadays as like like sort of AI or brains that are running countries in this way, in a sense, right? And we're basically trying to rebuild that from scratch, or have that. I mean, that's how Sky runs now. It has done so for a year at this point. Where it's really like you can go to, I mean, you can go to like sky-atlas.powerhouse.io. So this is, yeah, the Powerhouse is like the provider sort of offering this, like the interface to it. But that's basically the place where you can read like all relevant knowledge and data about Sky, how everything is done, how all the processes work, how you make modifications to the processes, and like who are the different kind of official bureaucrats that have responsibility for different pieces, and how do you sort of verify that they're doing what they're supposed to do. All of this stuff is basically contained in the Atlas. And that's then the attempt, I mean, at this point, still early stage, to replace the hierarchy and have it so that everybody has this knowledge.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we started talking about it like back end of 23 or something, because I also made this kind of future like projection at our NearCon, which was idea of AI CEO or AI president. Because very similarly, we had some experiments around governance, which ended up being like a massive bureaucratic, like self-collapsing system where people like naturally became corrupt because of a system. Like even people who like, I worked before and you like ask them, why did you vote on this? And like, well, because I want my proposals to pass, so I vote for somebody else's proposal. It's like,
that's the
it's like a
law
corruption system. Yeah, just like just twisting everybody into it. And so, and at the same time, managing hierarchical organizations. And like I worked at Google, massive hierarchical organization, right? All of the problems of like context propagation, of challenges, like, like any person, like as a manager, you cannot manage more than like 7 people really well, right? Like the quality of management declines. And then DAOs were interesting experiment to me because you would expect, right? Like, hey, everything's transparent. There is some objective that everybody like is clearly aligned on. You're joining to kind of participate in that, but it ended up having all these problems where, like, unless you literally had somebody who was like effectively a manager who would onboard people, who would give them context, who would like split tasks, etc., like people would not self-organize kind of around this, and there was a pretty big like kind of problems with like everybody expects somebody else to do stuff, right? Like, and I think that with token holders it's especially true. Like people kind of, even though the idea of tokens is to kind of create this like, hey, you have a token, so you want to have this project to succeed, so you should be like, putting some sweat into it as well. Usually people just expect somebody else to do stuff. So and so the idea of this like having a layer that effectively is like collapsing the hierarchy into like one AI layer that everybody can talk to, and it kind of everyone's manager. But because it's one system, it has context about everybody's work. It has context about the vision. It can split the work effectively, and it can allocate resources and people kind of real time, and it can do all the management, like professional development and understanding how this person is kind of advancing and when they're ready for a bigger challenge, etc. Like all of those things are kind of totally possible, and kind of the tools are getting better and better to do that. And so like when kind of I learned about Atlas, that seemed very much in that direction. Kind of I mean, you guys started more on like codifying things and kind of describing the structure, but I think the final outcome very in similar direction.
Yeah, and I think what's funny about this is that the approach that Sky is sort of forced to take is one where it's like very, very practical. So right now you could say that Sky runs on like a kind of like analog or manual AI, in the sense that there's not actually really being, like, AI is not really being used that much. Mostly it's like bureaucrats and people that have just spent a lot of time understanding the Atlas, that are then sitting and sort of following the Atlas and then making modifications and changes to it. And so the reason why that's the case is because it's not like trivial stuff. This is like the fundamental, like, like hardcore, like this is how this $1 billion system works, right? And of course we can't like mess around with AI and like, whoops, the whole thing failed, right? Or your USDS is now worthless, right? So it's like very much like this slow transition from like the old, completely sort of unstructured processes towards just structuring those processes in Atlas, turning into structured data, but still running it quite manually. And then kind of slowly in like sort of utilizing AI tools where there's like an obvious case where they can be used and they make things better and easier. And like, I mean, things like, I mean, this happens all the time, right? Dumping a lot of stuff into ChatGPT and then using that to kind of create the outlines for like new documents and new pieces of data in the Atlas, right? And just like using that as like a sort of a small scale assistant, right? But then the near-term vision is to really start automating it a lot more, just using LLMs. Like, and this is sort of, I mean, and this is something then that's gonna come quite soon, because it's also not that complicated. Like, it's quite easy to understand how you do this, right? And it's basically like there's two sides to it, right? So there is data integration and data extraction, right? So that's like the two things you need to do with this like shared knowledge layer, right? You need to have and because I guess also the other thing about this is that this is actually just kind of, we're just talking about bureaucracy and paperwork here, right? Like most organizations, they all do this stuff, right? But it's just in the real world, usually it really sucks because it's like you have to sit and like, I mean, if you're lucky, you get to type it in a computer. You know, if it's a government, sometimes you have to write it on with, you know, like if you're flying to a new country, right? You have to like give their country AI like a piece of handwritten paper for like the visa stuff, right? And that's literally this kind of system. Like what's happening there is like data integration, right? They sort of ingest like, oh, this person's name and whatever. Like, and of course that ideally should be automated, right? And you'd want to use AI to automate interacting with the AI, with like the knowledge layer. So, I mean, this is what I'm really kind of like just really excited about getting to in the near term, is like all the processes which, you know, are built with specialized software, where so whenever somebody does something like adjusts a risk parameter or something, right? Because of some there's been some changes in like observable data, and then that means now the savings rate should go from 12.5% down to 12%. Then the process of having the human sort of verify that this is the case and then actually doing it should be as simple as possible. Like ideally, it should be the AI thing kind of
analyzes data, sees that, proposes it,
and then
approves
like,
it
hey,
itself.
like. Yeah, like, I mean, just like here's the report of like why it should be done, and then here's the button you can click to do it. So the human is still in the loop and making sure it's as it's supposed to be, but like they don't have to sit and fill out a bunch of paperwork. And then also on the other side, then when somebody else wants to like verify, why did they do this? You know, are they really following the rules as supposed to? Then you shouldn't have to like sift through rules and be like, oh, let's look over here, look down there, look at this paragraph in this section. But instead, you can just kind of like get you know, various AI tools, right? I mean, obviously, like a RAG type thing works very well for this, but you could also do other stuff, right? And then just like help you with the paperwork, basically, of like anything you do, make sure that that information related to that is given to sort of the shared knowledge base in a structured way that follows the same structure, like the standardized way that all other knowledge is represented. And then whenever anybody wants to do anything, they can kind of grab in all the relevant data, so they have all the necessary context. And this also means you can get closer to like the dream of decentralized governance, right? Where like randos that hold some tokens, and I mean, this is the first thing you started talking about, right? Like you have these like token holders that are like upset about stuff, and they just want, you know, they don't really know what they want, but they just like want stuff, right? And that's because they're missing the context, and they don't have, you know, 6 months to become ultra turbo nerds and learn everything inside and out, right? But if it's some specific topic that's being debated, like the budget for some team or something, right? Then you should be able to have the kind of like, this is the industry standard, this is the best practice, this is what they did, this is the budget, you know, like have that basic knowledge available to them when they then want to create, like sort of provide their input. And that way you might actually be able to get like real knowledge out of people that are just like smart people, even if they don't have the specific context,
yeah.
But you can provide them that, right? And then you might actually be able to get something productive out of them.
Yeah, so I mean that makes sense, and I think kind of almost like it's your like governance copilot, right? Whatever proposal you're looking at, you're getting the context about everything that happened. You know, it summarizes you. It gives you like the diff between what it knows, you know, right, and what you should know to actually understand this proposal or make some decision. I'm actually curious how you're thinking about more either innovative decisions or what you mentioned as well with the core nodes, where you're allocating funds, you know, do marketing and actually making like keeping them accountable, making sure they're delivering outcomes. And the other problem that we've faced as well, which we've started doing this RFP process where we actually say, hey, we want somebody to do this outcome, and people bid. And the other problem is like just quality in general, right? Even if you have like an outcome, but like if the quality is not there, that's also kind of suboptimal, even though it's like cheaper price or whatever, faster delivered.
Yeah. This is essential, and this is actually in many ways, this is like the other the other side of it. So there's really like two major innovations that sort of transform Sky beyond just being a stablecoin project, but really towards more of like a, I don't know, something like a AI, decentralized AI ecosystem or something is kind of the direction it's headed towards, right? And because, so what we just talked about, the Atlas and all this like bureaucracy, and this is more like maintaining homeostasis of like some predefined like stuff that you don't want it to break and you don't want the bureaucrats to spin out of control. But it's not exactly easy to imagine how would this be able to kind of adapt to new opportunities in the environment and like, innovate and this kind of stuff. That's not super clear, right? And so the solution that Sky has to that is really like, it's actually a more defining central feature than the Atlas. So I guess I started with kind of but maybe, I don't know if they're both advanced features, I guess, but the main new feature is what we call the SubDAO, right? So that is this concept of like subdividing the protocol into potentially like infinite like new projects basically that are still sort of tied together with the core, but that fundamentally have autonomy and like that. And basically, so what a SubDAO has is, first of all, most importantly, it has its own token. So it has its own token, it has its own governance token, it makes its own governance decisions. It has its own like P&L, right? So it's like a completely separate business, really. And then it also has its own kind of section of the Atlas, which we call the artifact of the SubDAO. And this is actually where like all the complexity of the Atlas goes mostly. So the kind of the core Atlas is very static, right? Because all it does is it maintains like the homeostasis of like the basic Sky protocol in what we call the Sky primitives, which are then these like a set of like pretty restricted set of features that Sky basically sort of enables, that when used enables like the core features of USDS and the ability to collateralize it to just be available on multiple blockchains. And then the SubDAOs are the ones actually using these Sky primitives and going out and kind of deploying, like sort of expanding Sky. So it's kind of like Sky is like the Sky primitives is like a box of Legos, and then the SubDAOs kind of write their artifacts, so create their brains or their AI algorithms, which then determines how do they take this box of Legos and sort of build a big structure with them, which is actually Sky in a sense that they're building up. But Sky doesn't sit and top down makes decisions about where are the Sky primitives going to be deployed, like which blockchains will USDS be bridged to, and where will the collateral be put, or any of this stuff. Also, like marketing is another really obvious example, right? Where it's like really hard to deal with that in DAOs, right? There's a big source of drama very often. And it's like one of the big things of like the token holders being like, do more marketing, right? Okay.
That's like I think everybody gets that. Maybe Solana is the only one who's not getting, but like Ethereum asks everyone like do more marketing. Like
but then that's the beauty of Sky, is that like none of that, the capability to do marketing doesn't even exist in Sky Core, but it all exists in the SubDAOs. And then they have their own tokens, and they kind of have their own, like you have this much tighter feedback loop with like a small team where the founders have lots of tokens, and you can easily be like a whale in a SubDAO and have a lot of tokens, a lot of exposure to the success of the SubDAO. And then the SubDAO will go and kind of build out the Sky primitives to basically expand Sky and the Sky products, expand USDS, expand the allocation system, which is like how USDS collateral gets deployed into DeFi protocols. And then the SubDAO that successfully does this basically, and like is good at expanding USDS, getting out to users, deploying it in places that helps with providing good risk-adjusted returns, that SubDAO is going to make the majority of the profits from that. So you automatically have this like skin in the game, right? Which is like the elusive thing of like the bureaucrats are just sitting there and just going through the motions and get paid anyway, right? In this case, it's like if a SubDAO doesn't perform, it just dies. Like it's just not going to make money, and Sky just will not lose money from the operations of that SubDAO. On the other hand, if it does well, it it itself makes the vast majority of the profits. Like Sky just takes sort of a tiny cut, which is kind of, I guess, a platform fee or something like that, right? And now you have, I mean, and then there's the beauty of the SubDAOs, which is they can fail. Like it doesn't matter if they, well, I mean, it's not a good thing if they fail, but it's like they don't bring down the whole system.
Yeah, they don't bring down the
Yeah, and this is pretty much the only actually task of Sky is like Sky just has to, like Sky does have to have a brain and sort of have the core atlas that does a bunch of things and thinks about stuff. But the only thing it has to worry about is making sure that the SubDAOs can't blow up the whole ecosystem for everyone. So it only has to kind of like regulate against tail risk. It doesn't have to do like go to market. It doesn't have to do marketing. It doesn't have to do new features or like hire people and fire people and deal with compensation, any of that stuff. That all happens out in the SubDAOs. And then if they do it well, they make lots of profits. If they don't do it well, they might actually die and fail. And then the only thing Sky has to do is make sure that if one of them fails, that's not going to bring down the others by sort of regulating it properly. And then you really have a, you know, like I think a pretty interesting substrate for like a lot of cool innovation, both in like DeFi features, but then also in AI itself, right? Because every single one of these SubDAOs, they all have artifacts. So they all have like the SubDAO artifact, the kind of the structured data that basically is like the brain and the decision-making process and kind of the legal system in a sense of the SubDAO. And they can all evolve them in different ways and incorporate different LLMs and how they interact with them, or use different types of AI, right? Like use like formal logic and all sorts of stuff, probabilistic reasoning, and this is all the kind of stuff that we're really interested in figuring out how to apply in Sky. And then it's all public, right? So they can all also learn from each other. So they're kind of, I mean, on one hand, they're sort of like separate autonomous things that actually compete with each other often. On the other hand, they have this shared network effect where they, I mean, and there's like kind of two major network effects to share, right? One is the network effect of the USDS stablecoin. And then the other is the network effect of kind of the quality of the data and the quality of the AI tools that are available to operate their governance. So I think with this, you get like a really cool best of both worlds where they're like tiny little startups basically, but they kind of they wield a massive economies of scale, right? Where they all sort of benefits from each other.
So I mean that's very interesting, and I think very different model indeed from kind of how most of the Web3 is built right now. And I think that is a direction everybody wants to go, but nobody's like successfully figured out how to create the right incentive structure. And we should dive in more into like how some of the AI parts you think you're working. But I'm actually curious, how do you motivate the entrepreneurs to effectively start a SubDAO instead of starting their own project, doing effectively the same thing potentially, and even using USD as like in their startup, but kind of not consider the SubDAO? Like how do you create this like structure to really link things together?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a cost benefit analysis, right? So the question is the cost of being a SubDAO greater than the upside of accessing the Sky primitives? And if it is, then you're not going to do it, right? And so yeah, so I mean, of course, so one objective is make the cost really, really, really low, and then the other is make the Sky primitives as attractive as possible. But so on the cost side, it's like what in the end. I mean, so this is still something like the model for kind of opening up the SubDAOs is still in development right now, right? But basically, it's become clear that the cost can be made very, very low, and a way to think about it is it would basically be modeled something like almost like a tax, or actually the way one thing I was looking at for inspiration is actually like the licensing model for the Unreal Engine, which is like which is actually kind of also a tax, right? Where like it's like a percentage of profits, and then you just want to make that percentage so low that like it's like single-digit percentage of your profits, but like you only have to pay it if you actually had profits, first of all. And then secondly, you know, like the things you get with the Sky primitives are like, you know, like it's like an order of magnitude different if they're done the right way, right? And I guess and there's basically, I guess, 3 of them, right? There's like 3 major reasons why projects would work with Sky. Or I mean, in a sense, I guess, in the sense of like the very long run. Then the 4th reason, well, the sort of the cheat reason, is that there's of course a bunch of like, I mean, the same way that any ecosystem tries to develop its like any ecosystem tries to develop its ecosystem is through like grants and kind of top-down support, right? But it's kind of artificial, and I'm sure like you know that as a blockchain founder, right? That like
yes,
you want to give grants and you want to get businesses going and so on, but like the goal is to do that so you don't have to do it anymore, right? Like, because otherwise it's never going to make sense if the ecosystem only grows and only kind of scales if it
from your push. Exactly. You want it to like get into a flywheel where you're not actually pushing it, right? It's actually like pulling things from you, right? And kind of contributing back to the core.
Yeah. And that pulling thing, right? I mean, and it's funny because Sky ecosystem actually gets quite similar to a blockchain in the whole, I guess, dynamics and how it works. But it doesn't compete at all with blockchains, which is pretty cool, right? So like working with blockchains is like a major kind of, I mean, the point of the whole thing, right? Of like that, and that's also such a cool opportunity to the SubDAOs, that they're really good at like being sort of units of cooperation with different other ecosystems, right? But yeah, anyway, but with whether it's blockchain or whether it's a AI DAO ecosystem like Sky ecosystem, this pull effect you're talking about, it comes from economies of scale, right? Network effects. Like, so it's like the reason why you want to be somewhere is because that's where the others are too, right? And there's also, I guess, some like level of like sort of what do you call that? Just like fundamentals. So I guess that would be like, for blockchain, would be like the performance of the blockchain and the ease of use of like the virtual machine and that kind of stuff, right? But more than anything else, it's none of those things. It's the network, right?
Effects,
And so anyway, okay. So what does Sky then offer, right? So the first and foremost thing is like the stablecoin business model, right? That and so this is something that was clear to me immediately. That like, I mean, the stablecoin business model is just like a really attractive business model. Everybody wants to do it, right? Everyone likes it, and it's obvious that you can make a lot of money from it. But it only works when like it needs to kind of reach a critical mass before it starts making money. So with USDS, what the SubDAOs get is basically they get to get the entire kind of business, like the stablecoin business model, without having to get past that hurdle of like you need to first subsidize to a certain size before you start making money. So I mean, and the way that works is like, so in Sky, there's like 2 really important rates. There's what's called the base rate and then the savings rate, right? And so the base rate, that's kind of the rate that people can borrow at, simplified basically. And the savings rate, that's what you can get for depositing into the system, right? So it's kind of like the interest rate for putting money in the bank or interest rate from borrowing from the bank, right? And then there's a spread between the base rate and the savings rate. And that spread, that's like that's like the business model, right? That's the profit model. And then the key is that almost all of that spread goes to the SubDAOs that facilitate the users, basically. So there's a system, and it's called the accessibility reward system. But it's like a way to like track which users come from which SubDAO. And then those SubDAOs, they get the entire profit margin. There's still like a tiny spread that has to go to Sky core, because there is some like upkeep basically for kind of keeping the core, like basically managing the tail risk of the core. But then this also means that as a SubDAO, you don't have to do that yourself, right? So there's basically some lowered expenses for not having to deal with tail risk and only having to worry about kind of aggressively getting users and then just earning like the spread. And this spread is called the accessibility reward, by the way. So it's like, so there's that kind of three rates. There's like the savings rate, and then there's an accessibility reward, which is like a smaller rate on top of the savings rate. And the accessibility reward goes to the SubDAO. And then there's the base rate, which is then savings rate plus accessibility reward is going to be like very close to the base rate. And then there's something like maybe a 10 basis points or less spread that goes to Sky itself. Yeah. So basically it's like you get the entire stablecoin business model kind of without having to bootstrap it. And then there's the allocation system. I mentioned this briefly, but this is like the thing. This is like, so Spark is the first SubDAO, right? It's like the most well-known SubDAO. And Spark runs a protocol, DeFi lending protocol called Sparkland, which is a fork of Aave v3. But basically, the thing that sets Sparkland apart is it has very stable rates. And the reason why it has very stable rates is because the rates on Sparkland are not set based on like supply demand of people depositing into Spark. It's like it's directly drawing on the collateral of USDS. And this is through something called allocation system. So it's basically the ability for a SubDAO to basically borrow at the base rate from Sky and then deposit into yield generating opportunities. So that's like the other major side that like SubDAOs, they have access to like the massive scale of the collateral portfolio of Sky, and can basically deploy the USDS collateral and liquidity into protocols where they can then be sort of sort of distributed out to end users who want to borrow it in various ways. Whether that is DeFi, like it could be into like Spark has its own platform, right? Sparkland, but Spark also deposits into Aave, for instance, and Morpho, and then there's also a whole operation of doing RWA, like depositing into treasuries, and all of these things are all just based on having access to the allocation system. So these are the two like main sides of like that's the stablecoin business model, right? Like the ability to, if you attract users, you get the whole spread for having attracted users. If you find like alpha, basically, if you find like a better sort of source of collateral in terms of risk-adjusted return, then whoever finds that, they get to harvest kind of the spread, the value that they've accessed. Then the last thing, the final kind of value that Sky provides to SubDAOs is then the access to like the like, I guess you could say like the AI network effect or something like that, right? Where because you're building on top of the Atlas, and you're building, and you can kind of, you can learn from what all the other SubDAOs are doing. You can learn all their internal processes, all of the open source AI tools and everything that's sort of used to run the SubDAO. Then it's just very easy to automate the organization instead of having to build it from scratch. And of course, and then to the earlier point of like, this is all about network effect, right? It's like the more SubDAOs there are, the more attractive it becomes to be a SubDAO, because you tap into like a bigger ecosystem with more powerful AI that you're available out of the box. And this is the same for like the Sky primitives related to like USDS users and allocation system of deploying collateral into DeFi. That like the bigger USDS is, the more attractive it is to have access to these Sky primitives. So the goal is basically to get the value of having access to those three things above like the kind of the fee, like the ecosystem fee of that basically is like a slight cut in your profits, basically. But then beyond that, it's like, the fully open model of SubDAOs means that founders of SubDAOs, they get to completely like create their token, distribute the token how they want, like raise funds or do yield farming or do airdrops on there. If it's like a blockchain partner or something, right, they can use it they can use the token to like exclusively bootstrap the ecosystem, and basically all of these things, so that it's kind of like, you can really think of it as, the example you're making, like, why would you use SubDAO rather than just do the same thing, but do it yourself? It ends up becoming that it literally becomes a trade-off between, like, it's just like doing your own token, except there's a small ecosystem fee on your profits. And then there are these like access to these Sky primitives that then hopefully has a
massive value for you.
but basically has an advantage versus the it's worth more than the cost of the ecosystem fee.
I mean, totally makes sense, and there's definitely like this sounds like a good trade-off for a subset of projects, right? Not for everyone, but for anyone who is like kind of sitting on financial flows. But the AI offering, I think, is very interesting because that actually can be applied to a lot of projects which are not even DeFi. And so maybe the other aspect to touch on, we kind of talked about gaming before, like how do you think of gaming and kind of AI and intersecting that with SubDAOs in this space?
Yeah, so it's funny because like I got into sort of gaming as a thing for DAOs like very early on, in sort of the early stages of like realizing that like something was wrong, right? With like Maker's early stage after it had scaled, right? And so one of the things I became really obsessed with was this thing. I mean, I still think like a good way to describe it is what I call, like, it's basically Spark, and it's like kind of community excitement around DAOs, right? And sometimes it manifests itself as the thing you call a cult, right? That there are these people that are just like aligned and they're just like doing stuff and kind of like they're being kind of altruistic. I call it actually semi-altruistic, right? Because it's like they're helping each other, but they're doing it because they have this like shared upside that they get from helping each other, right? But there's no like direct coordination. Like no one gets, if you're a Bitcoin holder and you go out and you shill Bitcoin, like you're going to benefit from that a little bit, but most of that benefit is going to go to everyone else, right? And you're not going to see your share of that, right? But still, because people are sort of seeing everyone else is doing it, then somehow it's sort of like it manifests anyway, right? And so this basically is alignment, I guess you can just think of it as, right? This is like trust and alignment, and it's super powerful in DAOs, right? It's really like a sort of a part of the superpower of DAOs. And I think the existence of this phenomenon was the reason why people were so excited, so super excited about DAOs early on. Then what kind of killed it off was when you run into iron law bureaucracy, right? Then once you realize, okay, some stuff you can't have people just do for free, you have to pay for it. And then it becomes political. And then suddenly, I mean, the moment you see some corrupt bureaucrat, you kind of lose all excitement, right? Nobody wants to like volunteer to benefit somebody who's just ripping them off, right? So it's very much like it can sort of grow if everyone has it, but it can also very easily kind of just get destroyed. But I also think that if you have a lot of it, you also have the kind of the spirit to deal with the corruption when you see it, right? To take action and sort of do the hard decisions in governance of like getting rid of the inefficiencies and making the hard decisions and so on, right? Okay, so where I'm going with all of this is like, how can you build this, right? How can you like grow a community to kind of become more tight-knit and more aligned and so on, right? And that's where I actually think that gaming and like virtual worlds and like virtual interactions is like a really interesting kind of avenue to try to create this power, right? And in the real world, we have it with like nationalism and like people. I mean, if you live in the same land, then naturally you're aligned, and if you like speak the same language, and there's all these things that kind of make people naturally form a tribe, right? And sort of reinforce the fact that they're working together and they can trust each other and so on. And so, kind of a very early vision I had for the SubDAOs was that they would basically be, they would kind of create sort of their own culture and have cultural interactions with each other through the medium of Web3 gaming, basically. And then as we sort of progressed more and more heavily into AI and having AI playing such a predominant role in all this, then I think what we're seeing now is this kind of AI-driven gaming as well, like these like AI gaming worlds, right? And then the way it sort of all ties together is it's like right, that if a SubDAO is kind of like an AI, or you can represent it as an AI, and then the AIs can play games, and you can interact with AIs in virtual worlds, then you're starting to get to a point where you can sort of, you can actually, have a relationship with what used to be just like a boring economic construct, right? But you can make it sort of interesting and meaningful and create like bonds between the humans involved, right? And I think that actually results in like massive potential economic benefit. And then that kind of spins around, means that, okay, if you can create better economics through the creation of like art and games, then you can actually fund those things with it, right? So this is like a way for us to sort of get cool things that we like, because when we have cool things that we like, we can, we trust each other more when we kind of do it together, and that makes us create more value. And then it could, so I think that's like a really interesting thing to sort of pursue. And this is why, this is what led to this conversation, right? That we were talking about then the, I tweeted, I was asking about launch pads for AI agents, right? And then you mentioned the this on-chain AI system that Near made. So maybe you can describe that. We can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, on our side, kind of obviously been thinking about a lot of the same concepts, and at the same time, kind of there's a critical piece for me, which is how do we ensure that the AI itself is not manipulated with, is not trained adversarially, but even beyond that, is not trained in such a way to make money for some corporation, but is actually on the side of the individual or community, a DAO organization, like whoever's using it, it should be on that side, not on the side of corporation providing it as a service. And so I call it like user-owned AI. And so kind of fundamental building block there is, how do we actually run AI in such a way that we know which model was run, which code was run around it, and we can certify that. And that on itself is enabling to have autonomous agents, which are effectively can run themselves. And so Near AI is building that as like agent hosting platform where you can run agents. We have kind of our own framework, but we're actually working on, you can do LangChain. We're working on getting ELIZA as well up. And the goal there is, you can have a full end-to-end verification that this model was run on this output. It also is privately run, so you can actually upload your private data for individuals or for communities. And then if you want to do any transaction on chain, you can certify on chain as well that this was run kind of in this secure manner. And so now you can actually have smart contracts on chain that represent agents, effectively is their representation on chain, which both can call like the kind of this agent inside TEs, and then can receive back and validate that indeed this agent ran this model on this output, and act based on that decision. Again, to contrast it with current agents, like all of them are run on somebody else's computer. They're using OpenAI keys. OpenAI went offline for a couple of hours. Whole AI agent stopped working. So there's no liveness guarantees. Obviously, OpenAI can just ban everyone. Like tomorrow, they can decide, hey, we don't like crypto. Let's just ban every agent that does crypto. And obviously, like tomorrow they're going to launch a new model that like decide is biased, for example, to sell USDS, and now your governance framework is now kind of go in the wrong direction, right? So it's like there's no guarantees on decision making, in fact, on the core decision making, right? And so that's really what we're trying to fix at the core, and then build infrastructure around it to make it available on chain, make it off chain, kind of in all kinds of use cases.
Yeah, so I was thinking also, like, I mean, I feel like the major problem this also solves, because this is just something I've seen popping up on X recently, is these people asking like, what? So we have all these AI coins, but like, what exactly is the connection of like the AI coin to like the AI account, right?
Yeah.
And typically there's none, right? It's just a meme coin, sort of like it really is.
Yeah, it's a meme coin that there's an agent that talks about it.
yeah. There's like a separate, like centralized Twitter account controlled by somebody who hopefully is actually running an AI to control the Twitter account. Or maybe they're just running it on their own. Who knows, right? And then there's a meme coin that's sort of like however the mechanism of meme coin is, right, attaches to that. But with this system, you could actually like have a coin that directly controls something like what's the prompt that goes into what LLM, and you'd be able to verify it. And I guess it's like a swarm that sort of offers the LLMs. Is that how it works? So it's like a keeper network almost.
Well, it's like a TE cloud, yeah. So there's a cloud of machines, and so we ideally want to have liveness guarantees as well, so that even if a specific machine went down, some other machine will pick up the work from the same state.
But like, could anyone join that? Like, if they just know that this is the thing you want to run, so then I'll run it, and it cost me 10 cents, and I don't know how much it costs to run it, but whatever. It cost me $1 to run it. Pay me $1 and 10% extra profit.
So that's a plan. So that anybody can join this like on infrastructure level, and you specify effectively how much you charge per hour for your GPU and hardware, etc. And when effectively there's a payment channel attached to when you do inference or when you execute any of those agents, and so that payment channel gets distributed to the hardware provider, to the model provider, to agent builder, and which can also go to the DAO, for example, that controls the agent. We haven't opened that yet. I'm kind of finishing up some of these things, but yeah, that's a plan.
Yeah, I mean, as long as that's theoretically possible, then I don't think people really care about. If we can just simply solve the coin, and is the coin related to the AI or not, right? That's already a big deal.
I mean, the simplest thing indeed is like just making the coin to be DAO. Like, you can vote on upgrading the agent or changing things, etc. Like that's kind of the simplest thing to do, but then you can obviously expand from there what the token holders can do, and how maybe there is like economic value also flowing from that.
Yeah. So what I think is really cool about this is that there's obviously like a really interesting synergy between exactly this and then exactly what Sky is doing with the Atlas and the artifacts, right? But maybe it's like a different synergy than what you would imagine, I guess, right? Because the thing that it basically immediately comes back to all the stuff I basically was just ranting about for like 45 minutes, right? Which is that if you have an agent like this, so now you've connected the agent to the token, and the agent is like, I don't know, doing real stuff and making money or something, right? But you're still gonna have the issue that like whoever the governance of the agent is still easily gonna be a total mess, right? And even the agent itself might be a mess. This is actually one of the top issues, maybe the number one challenge in AI right now, I think, right, is that most of the time it's not the right choice, right? Like, you only want to use it for certain things. So like the idea of like having an AI just like run free and be like, oh yeah, it's ChatGPT, surely it knows how to let it do
everything.
Yeah, but also but on the other hand, if you have a token where you're just like, oh well, then have the token like override the AI, then the problem is you immediately run. Basically the problem becomes governance security, right? Then you immediately run into the issue of like, well, then the big token holder like 51% attacks and takes all the money, right? And it becomes like the decentralization aspect kind of goes away because it's not safe to be a minority holder of this, right? Or like you're still kind of relying on like the big voting block that kind of like make sure it runs and make sure it's secure and so on, right? And this is kind of what actually the SubDAO model of Sky offers, in a sense, is like, and this is also something that's really unique about the SubDAOs. And so it is that they don't actually have like sort of total sovereignty over their own root access, the SubDAOs, right? So what that means is they can't perform governance attacks. So basically, the artifacts, right? The legal, the rule sets of a SubDAO, they're just like defined off. They're just like held off chain in these like servers. Like, so it's like a distributed servers where you have the artifacts that are distributed across. It's not like a blockchain, right? It's like a simpler blockchain-like thing that just contains the data. And they then specify this is how it's supposed to do, and they specify it with a lot of human, like human values as well, right? Which is something like you can't cheat people, you can't like defraud people, and so on, right? And then what happens is if somebody creates a SubDAO and they write in the rules, we can't defraud people and something, right? Like let's say something like if you buy the SubDAO token, and then it's gonna maximum spend 10% of its income on contribute expenses, right? And 90% is going to go back to the token of the profits, right? Then maybe you have the founder is a big whale, and then this person just is like, yeah, actually no, we're going to pay all of it for, we're going to do this thing, this big project, and then we're going to need all the money to do this project. And then they just take the money for the project and sort of use politics, right, to like, they don't directly rug pull, right, but sort of like soft rug pull of like, which is the kind of stuff that happens, right? And to your point, it's sort of like humans are naturally drawn towards this. Like even good people end up sort of always going in this direction if there's not like a check on them doing this. And this is like what the Atlas offers, basically. That Sky itself, you can sort of appeal. So it's like a legal system in the sense that you can sort of, there's like several layers of.
So Sky is like a Supreme Court of all the SubDAOs, right? So in a way.
Yeah, and there's also intermediate courts, right? So it's not like a big bulky thing where everything has to be to vote for Sky holders. But there's actually like specialized SubDAOs called nebulae. Yeah, the SubDAOs have their own like weird names, but basically there's specialized SubDAOs that act as these like basically like the sort of first layer appeal, and then the intermediate appeals court basically, and then the Supreme Court is like the Sky vote itself. And so this is a place where like this is a system that is specialized in like handling exactly the stuff that AI can't handle, right? Like AI is great most of the time, then at some point it like hallucinates, or like it just screws up some really basic stuff.
Yeah, or people manipulate it too.
Yeah, or gets manipulated or attacked, right? Or there's a governance, like there's something, like there's a governance attack and like 51%, he says, well, we need to do a big project, so send me all the money. Like that's actually something where AI usually can't detect that, right? It'll be like, well, I mean, yeah, it looks suspicious that he wants all the money, but on the other hand, it's 51% of the voters.
Big project,
yeah, majority wants it, right? So, but that's where like human politics actually works for this kind of stuff, right? Where you escalate it and you have it go through this sort of court systems, and there's like a penalty for abuse of this, right?
Yeah.
Then you can, of course, it's slow and it's costly to like try to overturn this kind of stuff. But the point is to sort of like establish like a Nash equilibrium, right? Where like you don't want to do this.
People don't want to do it because they know they get caught. Yeah.
Yeah. Like eventually, like the gears will grind and it'll eventually get caught, right? So I think combining those two things actually I think is super exciting, because it gives you this like it gives you that final step of like the truly like a decentralized AI that really is itself in a sense, right? Like in a sense, like, yeah, somebody might have 60% of the tokens and you might only have 20% of the tokens, but that doesn't mean this person with 60% of the tokens can just like fully reprogram the AI and be like, now it's a different thing, and now it's serving me only. Because that could be really, and that could be described in sort of human language, right? Like values, like, so like this thing is always going to be focusing in this general area. And it would actually be meaningful to have that, right? Because that sort of, that question of like the general focus, like the general alignment of this AI, ultimately can be interpreted by humans, right? By sort of bringing it through the Sky machinery. And of course, and this becomes very scalable, right? Because of course you can have lots and lots of kind of edge systems that all kind of roll up into these intermediate courts, and then the whole thing only fails if Sky fails, right? So as long as Sky maintains governance security, then you could actually, you can really, you could run like a giant swarm of these kind of agents. And you can even do stuff, and so because you get a legal system for free out of the box, right? You can even do stuff like a complex legal system for agents, right? So they can do like any kind of like they can do sort of verbal agreements in a sense, right? Like,
so we're working on this exact thing, which is legal agreements through intents. So where agent or user can issue like, hey, I want this to be done, and then somebody says, yes, I'll do it, and that creates an actual like natural language based agreement with maybe some payments exchange, some delivery, some continuous payments, etc. But indeed, there is a dispute resolution process that needs to happen if the outcome was not achieved. But I actually think this itself, I mean, what you're describing is really good complement to this protocol, because to me, this protocol solves all of the challenges we discussed earlier, where it's like, hey, how do you get to a specific outcome, right? Like, not do more marketing, but actually like, hey, I want 100,000 impressions on the website, or I want to put a campaign that gets whatever million impressions. Like, now you can issue that, and this can be done by people, by organization, or by an agent coming in and doing this. And then if you have a dispute resolution system that can come in and say like, actually, it didn't do it, like, even though maybe it's a million impressions, but they posted porn, for example, and so like it's not really the like exactly what was asked, even though the specific metric was achieved. Like, because that's the biggest problem, is like there's sometimes like specific metric outcome is achieved, but the way it's achieved is wrong, right? And that's where you do need some way of like really diving in and understanding the natural language and human part of the equation, at least for now, until AIs get way better at this. And potentially like AI will be part of this dispute process, right? Like there can be like AI that like overview first and say like, yeah, I mean, this was wrong or this was correct. And then like the Supreme Court kind of comes in later, or, it's this intermediate court. So yeah, I think this is very interesting and kind of fits really well into the model as well we're building. So I mean, we're actually super over time. So I wanted to thank a lot for the conversation. I think it was super interesting to me. I hope everybody enjoyed it as well. And there's, I'm sure there's going to be more coming out around this from both of our sides. So I'm excited. I'm excited to work together on this.
Yep, thanks. That was super exciting. And sorry for taking you so much overtime. But this is what happens when if you're talking about blockchain and AI together, talking about the rabbit hole.
I know.
Agents, and the whole thing.
And agents and disputes and organizations. I know this is the jam.